If you've got a question, the voices of resin are here. Oh, PlastChicks.
PlastChicks is an SPE sponsored podcast. Hi.
Well, hey, how's it going, Lindsay?
You know, it's going great. I'm having some computer camera issues, but other than that, we're doing okay. We're surviving. We're not thriving.
Nevertheless, she persisted.
She did. I think that's what they meant.
So you got all your Christmas shopping done, ready for next week?
It's all done. It is all in this closet next to me, that my boys are woefully unaware of, and it just has to be pulled out, and I have to go through everything and try and remember what goes to what. That's going to be my own personal struggle.
Well, my mother just got my son a drum kit for
Very kind of her.
Josh's birthday, which is a couple weeks after Christmas, and so it's being set up right outside of my office, so things are about to get lit.
Yes, it's I mean, honestly, I feel like if anyone could thrive in that world, that would be you. So it'll make your meetings a lot more interesting, I think.
Yeah, it really will. So I'm Mercedes Landazuri.
And I'm Lynzie Nebel.
And with our powers combined, we are PlastChicks, the voices of resin.
Yeah, and we're here. We're here every Friday, first Friday of every month.
We do exist every Friday, but
we also exist on the other Fridays and the other days. But we especially exist the first Friday of every month, anywhere you get a podcast. We're also on YouTube if you're really feeling like watching what camera struggles look like in real time. And today we have a really fun guest that we connected with. Well, I think I connected with over LinkedIn, which is how we find some of our very interesting guests. Sometimes we attack people in public, and sometimes it's on LinkedIn. Those are our two main pathways. And so today we have Andrew Kamholz, the CEO of Edge Precision. So hi, Andy. It's really nice to see you.
Hi, likewise. Thank you for having me.
So, do you go by Andrew or Andy?
Either one's fine, but if you don't want me to call you Mom, you might want to call me Andy.
Okay, Andy. That sounds good. I got called Mom enough. We both do. So tell us about your journey to Edge Precision and what Edge Precision actually does.
Sure. We do contract manufacturing for precision plastic disposables. So that's going to be stuff you might have heard of, like lab on a chip or micro well arrays or custom micro well plates, 96 well plates, 384 well plates, all kinds of things like that. So these are mostly for diagnostic applications, life sciences, could be for laboratory research, lots of things in the drug discovery area, sequencing, digital PCR, all kinds of things like that. And we started off in a very specialized space. I'm a PhD bioengineer. I specialized in microfluidics, which is kind of one of the main disciplines that touches on a lot of these areas. But over the years, we've kind of gotten broader and broader into like, no, there's actually lots of needs in plastic labware and things like that in general. And so we've tried to be less on the real sort of deep scientific level of the really highly technical products into more generic products. So we're now serving pretty broad markets and doing just anytime someone needs something precision, hey, I really care about what's happening at the micron scale. That's the kind of precision we're talking about. That's where we come in.
So it's like micro molding, but not for micro parts.
Yeah, and so micro molding is a term that is confusing in my world because, typically we're talking about micro injection molding where we're talking about people that are doing, they're using nickel alloy shims that are based from microfabricated master structures. And so they're doing macro parts that might have some microstructures on them. And we're actually in-house doing standard injection molding, but we're doing compression molding for all of the micro-featured parts. And that's a little bit of a different technology, which I think we might get into later in our conversation today. So it's a little bit confusing, but generally speaking, I think you nailed it, Lynzie. It's like macro parts, but that have some micro features on them.
Yeah, I think that you might be the first person we've talked to who actually does compression molding. So
I
that's
was going to call that out too.
person we've
Yeah,
talked on the podcast.
and
Yeah.
what we do is really different, and it's actually one of the things that we want to chat about today, which is like it's really hard for us to interface with customers and explain what we do without confusing them and causing all kinds of weird things. So compression molding can mean a few different things. What we do is a unique process that we developed and have patented that involves a conformal elastomeric coating on a hard tool. So the surface that's actually doing the molding, believe it or not, is made out of high durometer elastomer. So it's not stainless steel, it's not aluminum, it's not nickel alloy, it's nothing like that. And it enables us to be able to basically, instead of injecting plastic, we start with a piece of plastic in place at room temperature. We heat it, we apply pressure. We might also evacuate or nitrogen blanket or provide the right kinds of molding conditions. Heat it, push on it, thermoform it in place, cool it, and then eject. And the ejection is the part that becomes really easy because the tool is ever so slightly deformable. So now the part is actually the rigid thing that's easy to get off without deforming. Because what any injection molder will tell you is microstructures. How can I do microstructures when I'm molding something that's several inches large and is going to shrink by a few thou when it cools? How do I make microstructures that are even smaller than that, where our tools kind of deform and allow that to happen with incredible precision? And the interesting thing is what we find is customers don't really want to hear that. They don't even really want to hear compression molding, right? They just want to hear, these are the parts that I need. These are the specifications I need to hit. Can you do it? How much is it going to cost? And how long is it going to take? And so one of the lessons that I've learned a lot over the years is the more I talk about the technology, the less people are interested because it just sounds like something foreign to them. And I look at the kinds of shows that you two attend, and because I've been following you for a while now and following your podcast. Actually, I have an embarrassing admission about that in a moment, but embarrassing to me, not to you. Don't worry. You see a lot of the same standard technologies, really high volume, really mature, right? I mean, you're working in a very mature industry. And we're doing something that's pretty new that not a lot of people are doing, that's done in a unique way, that we've worked hard to make fit the standards of what the industry expects. But the more we talk about things being different from what you're used to, the more it freaks people out,
People get a little skittish. But I do love that you're kind of taking all these processes, especially like the ones that are less popular, like the compression molding and even thermoforming, by comparison, when you're talking injection molding, like finished goods, or when you're talking finished goods, injection molding is probably going to, have more of the market share on that. And like to combine all those to make, to get what you need, figuring out that path forward. Like my brain, sorry, I'm not even actually asking a very good question or making a very good point because I'm just so fascinated by the combination.
That was a comment, not a question, Lynzie.
Yeah. Here's a question that's not a question.
I think I can address where you were going with that. So a real common type of product for us is somebody wants a 96 well plate. That's a pretty standard product. There's quite a few companies that mold it. It's a pretty mature technology, right? They've been around since the 1960s. And, the people who make those things really know what they're doing. They know how to build molds. They know how to run those things in high volume. Excellent quality of vendors across the board making that. But what if now you want 100,000 microwells that each can hold a white blood cell at the bottom of that? And those microwells need to be 20 microns plus or minus half a micron, right? An injection molder is going to look at that and say, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? And in compression molding, the kind of compression molding we do, it's actually incredibly simple to make those micro features, but it's not straightforward to make the main part of the plate, which is like really well done by injection molding. So that's kind of where we're in. It's like, how do we make the large piece of the macrostructures and the really fine microstructures and mix them together. That's what we've been doing the last 20 years and learning how to be good at.
It's like
Okay.
assembly without the intermediate steps.
Exactly. And so it's as you were saying, Lynzie, it's bringing in different kinds of technologies and figuring out how to solve a specific problem, but do it in a way that provides high quality product and when you can meet all the other expectations. Can I say my embarrassing thing now?
I was just
That's
going
a-
to ask.
We
Yeah.
love that.
Can't wait to embarrass the guest. That's first on your list, right? So I've listened to quite a few episodes, and it was only when Lynzie and I set up, a week or two ago that I was actually going to appear that I listened to a couple more that I heard the voice of resin and finally got the pun. Because I just took it literally. I was like, oh yeah, the voice of resin. They're talking about resin. And then I got the pun and I was like, wow, that's so clever. And I just felt dumb because I didn't get it, but it's whoever came up with that, that's a great pun. I
It's
mean,
all Mercedes.
I feel like I'm letting the dads down by not getting the dad joke, sort of.
That is
I think it's part of like that's kind of the dad. I mean, that's par for dads, right? Like maybe
Right.
get it
Yeah.
a couple months later.
I may have to turn in my dad card after this. So. My daughter would be only too happy if I did, I think.
But we're glad you got the joke of it now. That's the beauty of it. Well, okay. So I could go on like a 20-minute tangent on actually the technology we're talking about, but we got a lot of things to cover today. And so I don't want to skip over some of that. So we, do some light stalking as we do. And, we know that your company's kind of got a 50-50 gender split, which is pretty, unheard of in this industry. How did you get there? What did you take specific steps? Did it start to happen naturally? And then you're like, oh, let's like do this. Let's keep going. Or how did you get to that?
Yeah, it was very deliberate. And I think I got lucky to have a little bit of foresight and lucky in terms of some of the early hires as well to sort of look at it and say, hey, when we're very small, it's kind of easier to hire any sorts of candidates who you might want to hire. And it certainly applies to women or certainly applies to any other group that somebody might want to focus on. Because you're a small company, we weren't hiring people with 20 or 30 years of experience and where you're choosing from a very select group of candidates. We were sort of looking for like anybody who's got a good brain and a good attitude and it's going to be a good teammate and whatever. And so a lot of many of the people we hired had bachelor's degrees, and it was much easier to get a really diverse pool of people. And I just consciously said at the very beginning, hey, I want to hire for people whose primary focus is being a good teammate, is caring about what the goals of the company are, while also caring about doing a good job and taking pride and growing personally and learning and all the rest of those things. I want a person who's going to appreciate the sort of two-sided relationship of you're going to give the company some hard work and the company's going to give you some skills and some training and money and things like that. And so I really made it an emphasis in the early days to focus on trying to keep things sort of 50-50, try to make sure we get a nice snapshot of the diversity of all the people in the area where we are and sort of represent that in the company. And then what I found over time was it got easier because anybody, take any person, any color, any gender, anything, people want to go where there's people like them, right? And so if you have a company that's got all kinds of people represented, it becomes very easy to hire any more of anything, right? Because people will tell you, oh, I'm trying to hire people of color, and we don't have any people of color. And I think that there are a lot of people who would say, I don't really want to go to a company and be the first person of color there or the only person of color there. I want to go there where there's more people like me. And so when you make a really conscious effort to make those first few hires, and again, this applies to women, applies to LGBT community members, anything like that, you make a real concerted effort to hire those first few, it becomes so much easier to welcome more people of any type in. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I know my significant other is always, I've seen her go through the interview process a few times, and job hunting, and whenever she's interviewing with a company that has, like, whenever she's interviewed by women that are going to be her boss, she always mentions it to me as like, hey, like, this is cool. you know. And yeah, it can be rare in this industry.
Yeah, when I started at my current job, one of the things I noticed is when I got a tour of the facility, we were walking around and they're like, oh, like that woman's on maternity leave. And like, this woman sits over here. And it was very casual. They weren't like specifically pointing out where all the women were, but there were so many women in comparison to any other place I've worked that it was like, oh, when I, got pregnant and was, getting ready to tell my boss about needing maternity leave, it made it so much easier knowing that, like, I've been at companies where it's their first time having a pregnant, engineer, and they're like, well, we don't know what we offer.
Right. Yeah.
It's tough always having to be the one that like sets the rules and makes the policy and does all this stuff. And, and then sometimes if you have unfriendly coworkers towards that or towards whatever, struggle you're dealing with, it can get really hard. So you're right. Like having someone like you in that space means at least, you're not the same people, but at least maybe some of this stuff has been covered or at least discussed or at least thought about.
Right. Yeah. Trailblazing is so fun, but gosh, it gets exhausting.
Right. I mean, you die of dysentery on the Oregon Trail for a reason. Like, let's be honest.
I mean, it's also just so insidious too, because if we look at the case that you mentioned, Lynzie, if you're a woman, going into a job somewhere, and let's say you're a manager and you never really thought about a woman taking maternity leave before, it's not unusual for a manager even to subconsciously be like, well, I better not give Lynzie that long-term project because who knows, maybe she's going to get pregnant and she's going to disappear for a while. I better give it to somebody else, which is not at all appropriate and not a conscious choice that somebody would make a lot, but it's the kind of thing where it can happen, right? But if you have an organization where there are people who are coming and going for whether it's maternity leave, paternity leave, short-term disability or anything like that, if it's part of your organization where these things just happen from time to time, it's easy, right? It's easy to allow for real life for real people. And I feel like, that's what most people want to see when they're considering an organization. Like, this is a place where I fit in. For whatever it is that people feel like there are people like me, however someone defines that themselves, that's what people, I think, want to see to feel comfortable. So makes sense.
So having this well-balanced team, how do you feel that has shaped your company? Do you see differences in how this team collaborates or tackles problems?
I mean, there's no question about that. So I mean, we don't even have to go into specifics here. I think it's just well known that the more different types of people you get in a room, the more perspectives you get. And that's true whether we're talking about personal traits or we're talking about work history, for example, right? If we just focus on work history, you know, happens to be a woman, but her being a woman is not seminal to the story. There's a woman who works for us now who came from a company that was doing a lot of the PCR COVID testing during the peak of the pandemic. And she basically spent all day, every day, taking these kits that had been sent in and running the PCR on them. And she's not a biology expert or anything like that. I at the moment don't remember what her degree is in, but she's just a really good oriented person, was, running as a technician, doing a great job there. And when she came over to us, she had a lot of opinions about how to handle biological samples and how to do repetitive tasks all throughout the day where we avoid the common mistakes that come in or or fatigue or other things like that. It just comes from her background. And she improved our manufacturing processes and she improved our team practices, which is not something you ever would have looked at on paper on a resume and said, oh, yes, this person is going to come in and this is an efficiency officer who's going to, no. But did she do that? Absolutely, right? So I just think that respecting different people's backgrounds is huge. And obviously, there are tons of cultural and gender things that are different for different people, depending on who they are. For me, it's about brains in the room. More brains in the room means more ideas, and the more ideas you have, the better your solutions are. It's as simple as that.
Love it.
Yeah, I think that makes, it makes so much sense. And especially in the industry where, you're designing stuff or you're creating stuff, whether that's dictated by your customer or, dictated by the people in your room, there still needs to be that perspective that can be gained, not just by the one guy who's designed molds for, 57 years. That's not going to give you the perspective of, okay, well, now that this part is made, how does it fit in men's hands versus women's hands? Or how does it, is it something that a kid could easily open and they're not supposed to open? All those different perspectives coming together really, really bring a whole new avenue that you're right. You can't get just from looking at someone's resume. I mean, my resume is probably especially with the amount of jobs I've had in my past, it's 1-2 lines on it. That's not telling you what I did at that company. I mean, it's giving you can guess, but I bet I have a little bit more to add to those. And so, you being the CEO, you're kind of the captain of this ship. How do you see your role in, keeping this culture and, guiding these projects and, making sure this company steers clear of Titanic type culture?
I mean, that's a huge question, or really it's a huge issue. And I think my role is very different in many different situations. So it's a lot of different things. In your show prep, you wrote sort of cheerleading, or you steering the ship, or you on the sidelines, you what, and the answer is I'm sort of all those things at different times. And the the culture and steering the culture is a really big part of it. And it starts in the hiring process. I mean, we just don't hire anybody that doesn't have the cultural aspects that we want in terms of company culture. I'm talking about not personal culture. But if you're not going to be a good teammate, don't even bother applying to a job at our company. If you're not interested in the company goals, you're only interested in personal goals, don't even bother applying. If you're not willing to pick up the person next to you and help them over the finish line, as opposed to hold them back and make sure you cross the finish line first, don't bother applying, right? So that it starts there. But from that point forward, it's walking the walk. And so it is 100% about, I don't ever let little things slip by, but I also don't make a big deal out of them. So a great example, and you two have such a wonderful focus on women's presence in our profession and how to continue to work towards equality and make that what it should be, which it still is not today. I will never, ever, ever allow a meeting to go where a woman is cut off by someone else while she's giving an answer, because I think we know men are much more likely to interrupt women with their ideas. Women are much more likely to be interrupted as they're giving answers. I don't ever let it go by. I don't do a mental note and say, oh, I should talk to that guy later. I just say, oh, hold on, let's just get back to her point for a sec, and then we'll hear from you. Right? Again, I don't make it a, hey, now, don't do that. You did this, no. I don't do that. I just exactly as you put it, just course correct, right? Just go right back onto it. Now, the person who I interrupted might be a little bit miffed or whatever. The person who I interrupted, who interrupted the other person, might be a little bit miffed, but that's a real gentle correction that they needed to have. and we just stay right back on course. And everyone else in the room says, oh yeah, this person, what they were originally saying, the person who was originally talking, it matters.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of little things I always do. I don't let them slip by ever.
And that's so huge, because I think sometimes when people think about what can they do or how to help, or it comes out as like, okay, what's this huge thing? Do I have to have a lecture? Do I need to, pull people aside and, publicly shame them or anything like that? But it doesn't have to be. It's the simple things that are probably going to get better results next time, because that person may remember that they got kind of called out for interrupting someone. They might be like, okay, I just have to stop interrupting. And maybe they interrupt like a lot of different types of people. Maybe they're just an interrupter in general. And worst case scenario, you're just kind of putting an interrupter back in its spot a little bit. Like, that's your worst case scenario.
I mean, that's the thing with DEI, right? Which I can't believe we're living in a world where DEI is like debated as like, is this something we should be paying attention to or not? I think the real
part 2 of this episode.
I think the real thing that we're debating is actually what I call the DEI stick, which is like whacking someone with the DEI stick, which is what you're indicating, Lynzie, right? Which is, let's correct you, let's have a lesson, doesn't have to be that way, right? Let's just focus on the really small things and keeping things going where they're going. So like another thing that I would often do, and this is a piece of advice I would give to anybody, is if you're running a meeting and the meeting's got a number of people, and I don't care if it's all men or women, I don't care if they're all one color, it doesn't matter any group of people. I will go ahead and give my summary of whatever we're talking about. Maybe we're talking about a quote that we're putting together for a customer, and okay, this is where we are, this is what we heard, these are the requirements, these are the concerns. But I'll say, I'm going to tell what I know, and then I'd like to hear from each person in the room. And I'll go like that, right? I'll actually basically say, this is the order we're going to go in. And I'm pointing with my hand to people. And then everybody knows that they're going to get a chance to speak, that they are going to get the same rules as everyone else, that, okay, we listened to this person, now we're going to listen to this person, now we're going to listen to this person. And then I just make sure that it happens. Right. So the advantage there is no one's being called out. I'm not saying, Mary, what do you think? Or Gary, what do you think? Right. I'm giving them warning that I'm going to be asking for their opinions, but I'm also giving them that platform that they can basically take as aggressively and vigorously as they want, or say, I agree with what she said. I don't really have anything to add. That's fine too.
Now, Andy, you studied, I think first biomedical engineering at Johns Hopkins. Is that right? And then, and then you were a Husky, as you mentioned, right? You studied,
yes.
You got your PhD at University of Washington in bioengineering and microfluidics. What drew you to plastics? I mean, plastics get a lot of buzz, maybe not all of it positive, right? What really kind of took you in this direction?
Yeah, so when I was doing microfluidics in college, and this is now in like mid 90s, not to date myself too much, it was still all being done using semiconductor technology, so silicon and glass, right? Etching channels in silicon and bonding them with glass and things like that, which is an enormously laborious way to build these kinds of devices. And when I went into the workforce, I actually went to work at my second job for a branch of TCAN, which is still a very large and successful company that will be known to many people who use plastics. They had a sort of offshoot branch in the Boston area that was doing a plastic microfluidic device. So that industry sort of moved towards plastics as what's a way to do mass production of these kinds of parts that's going to be at a reasonable cost and reasonable capacity, which is still kind of a challenge for a lot of the products that people are trying to develop out there. But it nevertheless is really where that industry has gone to. I took a real shining to the prototyping technologies that the small group at TCAN had developed before I arrived. And when TCAN decided to sort of shutter that little branch of what they were doing, I said to my wife, like, hey, do you think it'd be a good idea if I started my own company? She's like, yes. And we were what do they call it? The DINK, double income, no kids at that time.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, and my wife's a PhD psychologist, so like we were doing pretty well in terms of earning and all that. And she's like, yeah, go for it. And of course, her support is the thing that actually gave me the confidence to do it. But so I acquired a bunch of the machinery, and I sort of carved out a nice IP space where we could have freedom to operate, and started the company. And I've been working ever since to basically provide plastic solutions to these challenging problems. Did I actually answer your question, Mercedes?
You did. You did. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I felt like I might have gone off on a tangent there.
Listen, we love a good tangent, so we are always on board with tangenting. But you did answer the question. It's almost more disappointing for our tangent string. But I love that you had, I love that a company is closing and you're just like, yeah, I can do this. I'm going to do this. I think that's such a, especially when you are looking at something where you don't have anyone else in the industry doing it. Like, your options are, I can do this or this goes away. And I think making sure that it still exists and like you're the one doing it, I don't think I would be brave enough to do that, but I love that you did that.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I think that at the time I didn't really understand what I was taking on. I sort of looked at the technology and the capability, and I thought, oh, this is really cool. You can thermoform really cool stuff with this. It's got to be useful. We
Right.
gotta, it's gonna have to definitely be successful and all the rest of that. And it's been a long process. This is
Right.
our 20th year now that we're in. And yeah, we grew, and we eventually took on investment, and then we were bought 100% wholly about 2 years ago by a large plastics manufacturer. And so we're now part of that company. Um, we've had success, but it has come with every mistake you can possibly imagine me making, I have made. Every oversight, every failure to offer the right kind of services, or sell things the right way, or package things the right way, or it's just been, when I look back at it, all I can see are an incredible number of diverging paths that were in the wrong direction from where we actually are now.
Right.
And I don't know that there's any other way. I wish I could turn the clock back 20 years and do it again, knowing what I know now, but that's not how life works.
So,
Go ahead, Lynzie.
well, I was gonna ask about the other direction of the clock. If you were gonna look into the future, what's a plastics innovation, especially something that you guys could be involved in, that you're looking to develop, or you think is going to be around the corner, or maybe not so close corner? What's going on in the future in the edge precision world?
It's a great question. And I think in general, when you look at not even specific to edge, but when you look at sort of this market for these microscale precision plastic disposables, the challenge, I mean, it's sort of been the next big thing in the industry of plastics, but for like 30 years now, right? Like next big thing, but it hasn't ever really landed in the way that people have been predicting for quite a while. And if people will go out and tell you, well, how big is the sort of microfluidics or microstructured plastics market? People will tell you like it's 8 billion. But the truth is, almost all that's reagents and or hardware. The actual plastic components is maybe 10% of that, right? So it's an overstated and inflated number. And so what we've seen is like there haven't been a lot of really large scale successes with a large scale, low cost manufacturing method that has the quality necessary for things that are often in regulatory or regulated situations. So we're not talking about, a pen cap or something like that. We're talking about, in many cases, a medical device or something that's got to pass class 2 or better standards. And there just has not been a real mature market there in terms of successful products. So what we've been trying to do at Edge is say, what are the simpler forms of these products that actually are enabling at the biological level or at some other level that can be produced to a very high quality standard at high capacity with the kind of pricing that's necessary to make it a successful product. And the pricing part of it has been one of the biggest challenges for us over the years because, 10 years ago we were making these in onesies and twosies, and these parts were all $50 and higher, and it doesn't fly, right? And today we're talking to customers saying, well, we can make these for you in the hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions, and it's going to be 50 cents or maybe even less than 50 cents. And that required all kinds of things to wrap into that. So a really good example is these micropore films that we've been making.
Right. Yeah, we wanted to ask you about those.
Yeah, and so filtration is a pretty mature industry, and there's kind of two big areas that they exist in. One is sort of a fibrous membrane that a lot of times has fused silica fibers or whatever that's sort of creating average pore sizes. That's what a lot of the filters used to separate plasma from whole blood are made out of, or a lot of like the lateral flow assays, even like a home pregnancy test, for example, is basically using a chromatographic filtration type technology to move the fluid across the test area. Or they're doing something like a track etched membrane where you're doing a bombardment of a material and doing etching it at the sort of subatomic level. And we're saying, hey, we can make these membranes where we've got, pick your size, 5 micron, 10 micron, 20 micron, 100 micron, 300 micron, whatever. We can do absolutely perfect regular pores of a monodispersed size, really densely packed, and we can have a film that's only 50, 100, couple hundred microns thick. So we're doing now, if you want to separate cells of a very specific size, suddenly there's a way to do it that doesn't involve this sort of gross average of a bunch of fibrous material. And it took us several years to figure out how to make them and make them well and make them reproducibly, have them come out properly, and then to figure out how to make them inexpensively. But now what we have is basically an off-the-shelf material that people can just buy that's just a film. It looks sort of like saran wrap, but it's got whatever the size pores are in it that people want, with the spacing that they want and the size that they want. And so now we're getting it almost to where it's just a commodity that people can simply buy and use and build into their devices. So put them at the bottoms of wells or put them as a filtration membrane that has a higher efficiency of separation, that sort of thing. So I feel like that's where I see the industry right now, where it's, we're not going to get to the point of let's have really complex parts that have many assembly steps and we're really working hard to try to bring our COGS down, but we can't get it down below $20 or $30 a part. It doesn't fly. We need components that provide value, but that are very cost effective to make. That's the bottom line. So that's where we're really focused.
Mm-hmm. And so there are a lot of different applications. I mean, you mentioned a few applications for the micropore films. What are some more quirky? We like quirky. What are some of the biggest ones you've seen?
It's funny that you put that on your list, because I think you know this, but we've had recently inquiries from 2 different beverage companies. One of them specifically relating to, do you know that in some restaurants you might go into, there's like these machines where you can kind of on a touch screen choose any kind of soda that you want. And they have a lot of different flavors.
Mm-hmm.
And so
always has one. Moe's restaurant always has the little.
I don't know Moe's. I'm sorry.
It's fast casual, like Tex-Mex.
Tex-Mex, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, I'm with you. I remember
Joey,
it now.
Right?
I haven't been there.
An item you can get there. You get the going
the
to
Joey.
Joey. Yeah.
Joey
I don't know.
Veganas.
I don't know. I don't know. I guess I'm partial to other restaurants. Anyway, apparently there's some pretty advanced filtration technology in those machines in terms of how they get different kinds of flavors or components to move and control them in a really precise and fast way. And we've actually had a couple of inquiries from 2 unrelated companies who are both saying, yeah, we need to use something like this for some sort of advanced filtration stuff. We've even had them talk about the user experience with bubbles that are coming out of the soda material. And, how does this membrane affect how the bubbles express themselves? And what is the sound and what is the feeling and what is the smell even to the customer?
Oh,
And how do these micropore membranes affect that user experience? So
Wow, that's
it's
fascinating.
coming from a world where we've been heavy into, just like really into biotech and biology and clinical diagnostics and all that, having a conversation about, how does your soda smell? And like, does it make you
it's a different
happy?
game.
Yeah, I mean, it's super cool, right? And it's funny because our chief of engineering and technology who ran the meeting, I was like, invite as many people on your team as you can because like, what a fun meeting to sit in and talk to
Abs-
these folks, and it's just a cool, fun thing to be involved in.
Very cool.
I love that. Well, we absolutely love anything that's fun and new and exciting in this industry, especially when sometimes things don't seem as fun and exciting. So we really appreciate you coming on here today. I think a lot of what you're doing is really awesome. And like I said, my brain is still spinning. I'm like, oh, I have all these questions. So I'll just live in that regret later and I'll just message you on the side every time I think of a question. But Andy, it was so nice to have you here. We really appreciate you, you know, reaching out and, connecting on LinkedIn. And we really look forward to, seeing what your company's doing.
Yeah,
I
thank you so much.
appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. Your podcast is amazing, and I've really enjoyed following it. And maybe you'll have like Jeopardy, like you can have a best of later. You can have me back in a couple years and ask me a couple
Yes,
more questions if you want. So
perfect.
you're doing great work, and thank you for what it's adding to our community. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.